Our final closing keynote speaker of the day needs no introduction. I believe he has spoken at all of the last 15 McAleese Defense Programs conferences in various different roles. This year, as the closing keynote speaker, he is best known by his mantra of one team, one fight, and China, China, China. Please welcome Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall.
Afternoon. It's good to be back. This is kind of a yearly thing that I've been doing for quite a long time, as was mentioned. And I think I'm the last thing between you and a scotch and waiting for the State of the Union. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to see that speech myself, so I'm going to make sure I'm not going to talk so long that we don't get to hear the State of the Union. I can promise you that anyway. What I thought I'd do for a few minutes is sort of update you on where I am on the journey in my current role. Unfortunately, our timing didn't work out so that I can talk about details of the budget, so we're not going to be able to say much about that. I'll give you a little bit of insight into the process we went through and the constraints we had as we produced the 25 budget that we're about to submit. And Jim, you'll just have to have another conference or something so that we can come talk about the content.
We're doing one next week.
There you go. There you go. China was mentioned. My whole tenure in office has been about trying to put the Air Force and the Space Force into better positions to compete with China, basically. Long-standing history, which I think everybody in the room is familiar with, of my concerns about China's military modernization program. And that nothing over the last dozen years or so has really changed my attitude towards that. And I think you heard Senator Ernst just talking about it to some degree also, as I think many speakers probably have. When I came into office, the first priority for me was modernization. And we formulated the operational imperative list, those 7 things that we need to accomplish operationally to put ourselves in a better posture. And we went through the process of doing a lot of analysis, ops analysis, evaluation of technology, concerning alternative courses of action, and so on, and came up with a long list of things we thought we needed to do to be competitive. And then we went through the process of submitting a POM, funded as much as we could, which wasn't very much with the constraint we had in the budget. And we went through the process of negotiating, if you will, or just evaluating with the OSD staff and others, and ended up with a substantial increase for the Department of the Air Force's budget to fund a large fraction of the things, almost all the essential things we'd identified. That is an effort that in large part starts with the 24 budget that we don't have yet. And I'm feeling a little more optimistic today. I was up on the Hill yesterday when the House voted on some appropriations bills, and it looks like we're in a better posture to get some appropriations done. But we've had to wait a very long time. The CR for several months, obviously this year, even more than usual. So hopefully we'll get those resources and we'll be able to move forward on all that work we identified under the operational imperatives. We were able to start some things within existing resources. I think we've done a pretty good job on C3 battle management, putting Luke Cropsey, General Cropsey, in charge of integrating all that work together across both the Air and Space Forces. There's a big tranche of money coming for him, a big increase in his budget when 24 is passed. We've got the CCA, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, started, and that's moving forward, and we're headed towards, hopefully, again, if we get the funding, a decision to narrow that field down a little bit and try to move that effort forward as a major program. We've also had some success in getting resilient space moving forward and getting some disaggregated, distributed architectures put in place for communications and missile warning, and there's more to come there. All of that, of course, depends upon getting funding. It's later than we would have liked, but we're going to be grateful when we get it because it's going to help a lot. And I'm going to get to 25 in a second and continue the budget story, but before I do that, let me talk a little bit about what we've been doing for the last few months and where that led. As I've been in office, and as I've talked to first General Brown and General Raymond and now General Saltzman and General Alvin, it's become more obvious to me that there were other changes we needed to make besides just addressing modernization. And we spent several months working out what we called an effort to reoptimize for great power competition. And just a couple of weeks ago, we announced out in Colorado that we had made 24 decisions about things we were going to change in the Air Force and the Space Force and the Secretariat of the department to try to posture ourselves to be more effective in this long-term strategic competition that we're in. And if you haven't seen it, that's all up in public. You can take a look at it. The intent there was to do things with minimal cost impact. So there's no money in the request. I'll give you this piece of data for 25 associated with these changes. We have now entered into a period of planning and execution. Some of these 24 decisions, and by the way, those were the bigger, more visible ones. There are others besides those 24. We're moving forward to execute those. The two service chiefs, you heard from General Gertline from the Space Force, and you heard from General Alvin. They're moving out on the things that they're going to be doing within their services. And Undersecretary Jones, for me, is we're moving out on some of the changes in the Secretariat. We're going to be very aggressive about our timeline. I'd like to say they're going to be zero cost changes, but they're not. There will be some costs associated with some of the things we're going to do. We're going to take active steps to minimize those costs and the disruption of moving people around and things like that. But they're changes we need, and they're changes that I think are going to put us in a much better posture. Very briefly, a little bit more about that. The department over years, over decades, in tight budget environments, optimized itself around meeting current requirements as efficiently as possible. And in an era where those requirements were largely about rotational deployments to the Middle East and current force structure that does things around the world on a stable, continuous, peacetime basis for the most part. That is not the posture you need to be in if you're going to respond to great power and deter great power and active aggression like we have now seen in Europe and which we might see at any time in the Pacific. So there are a number of things that are designed to reorient the department towards the threat and the type of conflict we might be called upon at any time to participate in and to address. And if we're going to effectively deter, we have to do that. We have to pose a credible threat if we're going to deter successfully. So really, I'm not going to walk through 24 of the changes for you. I'm going to mention a couple and kind of give you the big categories of them. The first one is we want our units that are responsible, our major commands, if you will, that are responsible for readiness to focus on readiness. Right now, they currently have about a zillion other jobs that they're doing at the same time. And so we're going to simplify their lives and make them focus on their core mission, which is to provide ready forces to all of our combatant commands and to have those forces available for the kind of conflict that we might be called upon to participate in. So that'll be focusing for those. We're going to create other organizations, which we generally currently do not have, to focus on the future and to be thinking about the pipeline of continuously improving capabilities we need to be fielding. One of the realities of being in a strategic competition with the kind of pacing challenge that we have is that you have to be able to change more quickly than we've been used to for the last 30-odd years. We don't live in a world in which we can build a system and say, okay, it's the dominant system, and it's going to be the dominant system for 30 years. It's not going to happen, because the other side is going to respond very quickly to anything we do. The other side is demonstrating that it's responding very quickly to things we talk about doing before we even have done them. So we're going to have to be much more conscious and much more agile and much more adaptive and field increased capabilities, improved capabilities much more quickly than we're used to. We're going to need organizations that are thinking and planning and preparing and helping us do that. On the Air Force side, we're going to have separate organizations on the acquisition side of the house, the technical side of the house, and the operational side of the house to work that problem. They're going to work in close cooperation and elevate options for decision to the senior leaders of the department, the chiefs and myself and the under. So we're going to create new organizations. In the Air Force, it's going to be an Integrated Capabilities Command at the 3-star level, as well as an Integrated Development Office in the Air Force Materiel Command on the acquisition side. On the Space Force side, because of its small size, we're going to create a single Futures Command that'll have the same responsibility, but within one command we'll integrate the technical side of the house as well as the operational side of the house. We're going to elevate the status in the organization, this is number 3, of some of the types of mission capabilities that are much more important when you're in a strategic competition. And in particular, cyber. We're going to elevate the 16th Air Force out of Air Combat Command, make it a more direct reporting command, focus it on providing ready cyber forces of various types to respond to combatant commanders. So we're going to elevate that and have a stronger voice with the cyber and the information warfare side of the house on the operational side. We'll do something very similar on the acquisition side and create essentially an information dominance system center on the acquisition side, as well as elevate the nuclear enterprise on the support side, on the acquisition side. So there's a single organization that brings together all of our nuclear capabilities in support of Global Strike Command. Now, these are all designed to elevate those things to a higher level. The new organization on the acquisition side will have both cyber, information warfare, electronic warfare, and C3 battle management responsibilities. So all those information dominance elements of the technical aspects of what we do will be integrated in one command, reporting to Air Force Materiel Command. So those are sort of the organizational constructs. Consistent with that, in the Secretariat, we're creating essentially a chief architecture, chief engineer's job, which has been what Tim Grayson's been doing for me, make that an office. We're going to have a program evaluation office that'll be responsible to the chiefs, under myself, and we're going to have a competitive activities office that'll oversee all of our sensitive activities that are designed to make us competitive. These are gaps that we had, basically, that we need to fill in the Secretariat. Then finally, there's the people piece, which is about making sure we have the quality and the skill sets and the readiness among our people that are required. And in general, we're going to start evaluating and assessing readiness for the kinds of conflict that we might be called upon to do, something we haven't been doing. So that's sort of the broad, big picture of what we're trying to do under operational imperatives. And we're going to move very fast on this. We've put people in charge. If we let the bureaucracy of the services and the Pentagon take its normal pace with these things, we'd still be talking about and arguing about differences between staffs and who's in charge 2 years from now. We're not going to do that. Timeline to get all this stuff done is months at most, and I'd like to see it measured in weeks. I don't expect everything to be done by the end of the administration, but Sir General Alvin has made it clear, and so has General Saltzman, that they are totally committed to this, and they've got a lot more than a year to go, whatever happens to the political appointees like myself. Okay, so that's basically where we are in terms of all that. There will be some costs associated with this, as I mentioned earlier, but we're going to try to leave people generally where they are instead of moving them. We're going to be flexible in how we set up these new organizations and how we shift responsibilities around and try to minimize both the local impacts, the disruption, as well as the costs that we have to bear, which we're going to try to absorb out of existing resources. Okay, there are a few others in there, but I kind of hit the highlights and what we're trying to accomplish there. Let me talk a little bit about what's going on with 25. The most, I think, salient fact that you need to understand about 25 is that we were limited by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And there was not an opportunity as we went through building our budget for 25 to really do large trade-offs and to aspire for additional money. We had a zero-sum game, basically. And so it was constraining. It was not to the level that we had anticipated might be possible for us to budget to the year before. So it's not going to be a significant increase. I can't give you any specific numbers, but starting out with in your mind, I guess. I got to be careful what I say here. I want to get ahead of myself. All the reporters have got their pens out now. I know that. Okay, Kendall's thinking about what he's going to say. It could be. Don't expect any real growth. Okay, let's just put it that way. As far as I'll go, I guess. It means we had to revise our plans from just what we had a year ago. And so what approach do you take in that environment? There are things that we have to do now that are just demands of the current force. We have to sustain the current force. We have to keep it to an acceptable level of readiness. We have to support O&M, for example, adequate to keep a reasonable level of availability of our aircraft. We have to pay our people. And as you all know, there's been an issue with the ability to recruit into the military. The Air Force is doing well at that right now, but to sustain that, we've got to pay people competitively, and we've got to do some things that make sure that the force is adequately taken care of. So when you do those things, you get to kind of what's an acceptable level for funding the current force. And that kind of gives you a floor, if you will, which absorbs a certain fraction of the money that you have. Again, it's a zero-sum game, right? So what's left is the money that's available for modernization. There are two kinds of modernization. There's procurement, which is buying things we already have developed and putting it in the hands of our warfighters. And there's research and development, which is the things we can't buy yet, but we have to do the R&D if we're ever going to buy them. And all the operational imperative work tends to fall into that category. So it was important for us to protect that as much as we possibly could. So we had to make some trade-offs in order to get the balance we thought was the best risk management balance we could in the department. So that's where we ended up. That's what you're going to see. It's a little different story for the Air Force and the Space Force. On the Air Force side, there was some trade-off we could make between procurement and R&D. There's virtually no opportunity to make that trade-off on the Space Force. It's basically, the Space Force is about 65% R&D. So there just really wasn't anything you could trade off to protect the R&D. So we had to make some decisions there. Be careful how I say this, but I would not reject additional money in 25 when you see our budget, okay? Yeah, that's a good euphemism. Is that a good enough euphemism for the crowd? Okay, so that's where we are. That's what you're going to see, and you're going to see that reflected. To be honest with you, I think that 25, while difficult, is at a level that I think we can accept, and it will still allow us to make progress on the modernization we need. It won't allow us to buy currently available things at quite the rate we would like to buy them, and it keeps the readiness, if you will, of the current force at a level which is not ideal, but which is acceptable. So it's a very tight budget that we have for 25. 26 we're working on now, and we see very big problems dealing with 26. We're looking at a number of things which are increased. Sentinel is one of them. I won't go into the details about this, but you know, you're aware of the number occurred on Sentinel, a pretty large increase in cost. So I'm still recused on the program. So other people are trying to work their way through that. But we have to deal with that as well as a number of other things. So that's basically overall where we are. I think there's a light around here somewhere that's supposed to tell me what I'm supposed to do.
Out in front. So you're in green. You're in good. You're
Good.
green. You're green. See that green line coming up to you?
I'm going to stop in a minute and let you ask questions. But that's essentially overall where the whole thing stands. We're looking forward to the interaction with the Hill. One of the things that the Hill gave us in the 24 Authorization Act was the ability to do something we're calling Quick Start. We've got a couple of candidates for that that I think are very high priority programs that are responding to the threat that I'd really like to get started right away on, where we have to obtain the Secretary of Defense's approval. There's a staffing process to do that. We've identified those. They both have a heavy space spent. If I were to look overall at the health of the two departments, the two services that are in the Department of the Air Force, I am more worried about the Space Force right now than I am about the Air Force. The Air Force has a large installed base. It's got a lot of existing capital investment. It's got a lot that it can capitalize on. I know General Saltzman talks about this a lot. He borrowed it from me. I think General Gertline may have mentioned it too. We're a nation that had a merchant marine and woke up one day and realized it needed a Navy. That's the situation the Space Force has. And so we've got to transform our space capabilities from peacetime capabilities, benign space environment, to warfighting capabilities. We've got to do that both for the services that the Space Force provides to the Joint Force, and we've also got to protect the Joint Force from the other side space assets, which are proliferating. So we got a big problem there. And of the two services right now, the one I'm more worried about within the Department of the Air Force, at least, is the Space Force. So that's essentially our overall posture. You've gotten a little bit of a preview of what we'll be talking about when we send our posture statement up and when we provide our budget to the Hill and do our hearings in the next few weeks. So with that, I'll stop and take the questions that I'm not going to answer.
Yes, first question here, sir. Sir, I'd like to think you're going to answer this one, but so I'm a West Point grad who crossed over to the Air Force. So I've spent the last 23 years.
Me too.
I know that, sir, and I know Kristen obviously is my classmate. So kudos on the warrant officers. I approached 2 SecAFs, 2 CSAFs, and never got anywhere with it. So I'm thrilled about it, and especially for Cryptologic.
Yeah.
Because that's the other part of this, is when the college program was introduced, I lost a lot of skilled linguists to go off into college. And I'm a person that always thinks kind of out, and that's why I'm in the innovation space. But my concern right now is 2028 and the new pension system. And we're going to lose a significant portion of our mid-level officers pilots, and I'll guarantee those NCOs are going to head out the door. And we need them, obviously, in, you know, that core office. And I'm curious if you guys are looking at that now and recognize it's coming, or if it's too far out and we're going to have to throw more money at something that money may not be the solution.
Yeah, good question. And I can answer that one up to a point. As we went through the 4 or 5 months of work on reoptimizing for great power competition, one of the things that I had the team look at was the idea of warrant officers. And I have some experience from my Army days a long time ago with warrant officers who were, you think of them sometimes as helicopter pilots in the Army, which they are, but they're also maintenance people and they do other things. They do highly specialized things that they stay in a career path that keeps them in that highly specialized thing. And they become masters at that craft, if you will. In my case, as an air defense officer, it was maintenance officers for a very sophisticated weapon system. And I thought that had a lot of merit. I benefited a lot as a young lieutenant, and I think our NCOs and enlisted people benefited a lot from having those people in the unit. And the Air Force got rid of them about 60 years ago, I think. There was quite a conversation we had about whether to have warrant officers again or not. And the area I felt most strongly about it was cyber and IT. And I have known officers and NCOs both who were in that field, but were finding themselves going off to go to school, to go to war college, or to go to get a master's degree or something, and losing some of that expertise. It's a perishable thing. These are fast-changing areas of technology where if you don't stay in the field, you have to go back and kind of catch back up again, and that's hard to do. So anyway, we ended up, after a great deal of discussion, establishing warrant officers for cyber and IT. And we're going to get that in place. We're going to get some experience with that. The enlisted people love this idea. They're very, very embracing it. And the community loves this idea in this case. So I think we're going to have a lot of enthusiasm about this. We're going to move very quickly on this. We're looking at getting our first crop of cyber and IT warrant officers started later in just a few months. The broader issue you brought up, I don't have any feedback to give you on that. I'm aware of it, but you've stimulated me to go do some analysis and take a look at it and try to survey people and find out what's going to happen. Is the new retirement system, which is phasing in essentially over time, right? It starts to hit us. I think there's a pretty significant unknown about how people are going to behave under that. 2018. Yeah, and are they going to leave, right? Are we going to have a larger number of people than we would have traditionally had leave at that point in their career where we didn't expect people to leave? So I don't know the answer to that, but I think you're right. We got to go take a hard look at that and not wait until it happens and deal with it when it happens. So thank you.
Secretary Kendall.
Thank you, Steve. Secretary Kendall, John Young. We didn't hear very much today about the penetrating NGAS, so I have 2 questions. One is, do you still see it coming online about 2035? And what is your acquisition strategy to get from here to there?
I don't think we say much about the NGAB platform publicly, so I can't add much to it. I think you already know. We are looking at a down select, and we're looking at fielding in the 2030 plus kind of a time frame. Okay, I think that's about as much as we can say about that program. It's a fairly highly classified program. How you doing?
Sorry, sir.
Tech Sergeant O'Brien, U.S. Air Force. I was wondering, at the base level, at that operational level, how does reoptimization affect an airman today?
It's a great question, and a lot of people have it, so thank you. When we just had the AFA, Air Force and Space Association conference, and we talked about this a lot. There are some things that I didn't really mention because I talked about the organizational things. One of the things we're going to do, one of our decisions was to create what we're calling units of action, which are fully deployable, fully integrated wings. And it will vary depending upon what part of the Air Force you might be in. Some of our forces fight in place, basically. The Space Force tends to fight in place. Others are on an operational plan, and they're expected to go forward and fight somewhere else. Whichever it is, we want our wings to be integrated and complete and ready to go do what they might have to do if they're called upon to do it. Here's what we've been doing for quite a while now. We've been sourcing our rotational deployments by sending, say, a fighter unit with the squadron of fighters, if you will, maybe a group of fighters. And then we've been crowdsourcing the rest of the wing from across the entire Air Force, including the reserve components. So basically we get a few people from here, a few people from there, a few people from there, and they show up in theater for a 6-month deployment. And all of a sudden they're a unit, right? That's worked when we've been in a fairly benign, relatively speaking, environment. That's not the way you want to be ready to go to war against a major competitor. My ancient, by now, Cold War experience was that our units, once upon a time, would expect that somewhere during the year, somebody would walk in and say, the war has just started, show me you're ready to go. And then you'd have to go off and you'd have to deploy for some period of time. Demonstrate you had all the equipment you were supposed to have, demonstrate that everybody knew what they were supposed to do, and that you were ready to go. We haven't done that forever. So anyway, we're going to basically make sure our units are ready to go fight, that they're complete and integrated, and then we're going to evaluate them on their ability to do that. We're going to increase the size and the complexity of our exercises so that they reflect the kind of environment and types of things you might actually have to do. So these are things that airmen are going to see, okay? They're going to, it'll take a little bit of time to implement some of these. It won't be the same for every unit. And one of the things that we have right now is a structure where we have a base where, fairly often, where there's a base commander and a base wing that has a lot of the functionality in that wing that isn't associated with the combat wing, the airplane wing, if you will, that might be on the same base, but is needed if that wing is going to deploy and fly. So we got to go take a hard look at that and look at what a garrison part of the organization and the operational part of the organization and how we're allocated between the two. So what we're going to have for you, I think, is more realistic training. You're going to be seeing exercises that are more like what you might actually have to do. And you're going to be seeing a structure and a command chain that is oriented on that. And there'll be a number of other things that will affect training. We've been talking for 2 or 3 years now, I think, about multi-capable airmen. The phrase we're using today is mission capable, which is, okay, we're not going to give people an option or an opportunity to learn another skill. We're going to tell you what the mix of skills is you need to be fully capable of doing what you might have to do in a conflict. And we're going to make sure you're ready for that conflict, what happens. At the end of the day, all of this stuff is about being able to deter more effectively. What we want to do is demonstrate that we have a force that is so powerful and so ready that nobody wants to take it on. That's the end goal. But if somebody does take it on, we want that force to be ready to go do its job and have as many people come back from that as possible. So that's what we're doing.
Mr. Secretary, I've got to take one back up because I walked off at the mic when he asked the question, and we're using acronyms, and I think we got acronyms confused. So,
and I apologize for my Northeast accent. I was talking about the penetrating tanker, the NGAS.
Oh, gas. I heard GAD.
My apologies.
My mistake. I was talking about next generation air dominance, not next generation aerial resupply system. We're doing an analysis of alternatives. That program was stimulated by the fact that the threat keeps getting worse. It's reaching out to longer and longer ranges to engage, our assets, including tankers. And so the program we had planned with the XYZ progression, we had basically set aside. We still will continue to replace KC-135s on a one-for-one basis, so we're going to keep doing that. You'll see in the budget, there's going to be some gap probably between the current KC-46 program of record and when we could introduce a new concept that's more resilient. And so we will continue to buy tankers. That's just our current plan, right? Everything's subject to budget changes, but we intend to continue to buy tankers at about the same rate as we go through that period. We want that period to be as short as possible. So we're still looking at what alternative concepts might make sense, be operationally viable, be affordable, et cetera. And I think the AOA, the analysis of alternatives for that, is kicked off and is running now. So we're not quite ready to announce any decisions on that yet. We're not that far.
First and foremost, thank you so much, Secretary Kendall, for all of your insights this afternoon. My name is Rosalie. I'm with Flatter Inc. We work on building a coaching culture for our airmen and guardians. At the recent AFA Warfare Symposium, it was mentioned about the restructuring of the Air Force wings into units of action. And I was wondering if you could share your vision for incorporating talent management within this innovative framework.
Yeah, there's a relationship, of course. As we define the skill sets we need and what's in a unit of action and what mix of capabilities we want people in that unit to have, we've also got to align all of our training with that, right? So we're one of the things we're doing, which I didn't mention, is we're changing Air Education and Training Command to Airman Development Command. And we're going to give it wider authority over the development and the career paths of our individual airmen throughout their careers. So we're going to centralize some things under what's currently under General Robinson. And we're also going to manage more actively and ensure that people get the skill sets that they need throughout their career. So it's an attempt to make sure that the pipeline of people and their progression that we have as they go through their careers meets our operational needs and actively manage that. Okay.
Secretary Kendall, we got time for one more question.
Really? That's all? Oh, the lights are red. It's those lights. Those are the lights. Okay, I got it. I figured it out now.
Secretary Kendall, thanks so much for your robust efforts across your whole career. I've followed you from industry, and thanks for all you've done. In the context of tight budgets and the risk it yields, deterrence is even more critical. So how does the department integrate deterrence across all activities from R&D to acquisition to test operations?
It's a good question because, as I mentioned earlier, deterrence is the name of the game. We don't want a war, and we don't think war is inevitable. But we do know that we have a strategic competitor who is building a military designed to defeat the United States of America and our partners that might fight with us. We've got to demonstrate that we've got a military that's capable of taking that military on. And you don't get there by standing still. We've got to move forward continuously. And I'm working on a study, I'll give you a preview of this, that Congress asked us to do on the Air Force in 2050. And I think this will be part of the reaction to that, but it's also true today. And I mentioned it earlier briefly. We cannot assume that we're going to have enduring advantage. We can assume we can work for what is always going to be a transient, temporary advantage. And this is what my Cold War experience was like too. In areas like armor, anti-armor, ASW, electronic warfare, and you're seeing some of this right now play out in Ukraine in real time, where standing still, you will lose. You've got to move forward. And you've got to try to move forward more creatively and faster than the opponent. And as I've watched China and looked at the intelligence come out of China, what they're doing in terms of their modernization program, they're not waiting for us to do things. As soon as we start to talk about something, they start thinking about how to counter it. And they start working on those programs. We're going to have to move faster. We're going to have to be more agile. So that's, kind of a long way to get around your question. Deterrence is going to rest on our ability to stay ahead in a race which isn't going to stop. It's a very different cultural way for us, I think, at least in the last 30 years or so, to look at our military. You heard a little bit of it from Senator Ernst that I heard just as I was leaving. People have got to wake up to the fact that this is a real threat. And it's not a threat that we can do something about and then not have to worry about it anymore. It's a threat that's going to be with us for the next, probably for the rest of our next few decades, I would say, rest of our lives, possibly. I lived that kind of an environment with the Soviet Union. My 20 years of active duty and service as a civilian during the Cold War, and then growing up during it. It was a constant presence. It was something we felt all the time. And I think we've lost that. And it's turning out to be quite an interesting exercise, even within the military department, to get people back into that frame of mind. I've said earlier that, some time ago, I guess, that if there were one thing I could accomplish as Secretary of the Air Force, it would be to establish a sense of urgency about the problem. That's going to be a sense of urgency that isn't transitory. It's going to be a sense of urgency. It's got to be continuous. And it's a major cultural shift to do that. It's very hard to get people out of a mindset that they've been living in for their entire career. But that's what we're going to have to do. And deterrence is going to depend on that, I think.
Mr. Secretary, we've got, because Jim didn't take his shoes off, he can't count, but we've got one more question in the back, and then because it's his conference, he wants to ask you a closing question. So,
Sir, Bill Conley, good to see you again. So my question actually kind of builds off the answer you just gave, but obviously, I mean, going backwards, to better buying power, getting defense acquisition right, all the things that you've done over your career. What are the foundational things you wish you had now that you could have amplified then that would make this job easier?
Hi, Bill. How you doing? Good to see you. I wish we had moved faster in space. We recognized in the Obama administration that space was no longer a benign environment, and that both Russia and China at the time were on the way to fielding a suite of capabilities to take out our assets in space. And at that time, it was more that threat than it was the capabilities they were fielding themselves to target the joint force. That came a little bit later. But we changed our strategy. I think the year was roughly 2013 or so, 2014. And it changed to recognize that space was a contested environment. And we started having conversations about what that meant. I remember giving a one-chart brief to the Deputies Management Action Group, the budgetary debating group in the Pentagon that the Deputy Secretary chairs, that showed that we had in space a choice between acknowledging that space was not a place we could operate because it was too lethal, too hard to survive, or figuring out a way to survive in space, and probably by proliferating our capabilities. So we started the thought process, but we didn't act fast enough. And I was quite pleased when I came back into this job that the Space Force that had been created was thinking about this and was at early stages still, but moving in the right direction. They were a little bit ahead of, that we weren't starting from zero, right? But we still didn't move as fast enough. I mentioned earlier of the two services I'm responsible for, I'm more concerned about the Space Force. The Space Force itself is tiny, but the importance of space is enormous. And one of the things we're doing in the Air Force is we're shifting our reliance on communications, airborne relays, and surveillance, ISR platforms like AWACS and JSTARS. We're shifting a lot of those capabilities up into space. And we're going to have to do it in a way which is resilient. We also have got to get on with a counter space capability. The Chinese have figured out that they can support long-range strike from space. They're reaching out to longer and longer distances. That means they have to have space systems to support those weapon systems, and they're fielding them. So space is my biggest concern. We're not moving as fast as we need to be in space.
And sir, and I hate to say this, it's like I'm feeding a great white shark from the side of the boat. Two things. Are you happy with what you're seeing in ABMS? And then secondly, if you had one more dollar, sir, it's coming, where would you spend it?
I just gave you the answer to the second part of that.
I was hoping, sorry, sir.
But ABMS, I'm a lot happier than I was 2 years ago, but we still got a long way to go. I think Lou Cropsey has done a fantastic job. He and his team, he's got a good team both from the Space Force, General Olson and General Flack Clayton on the Air Force side, on the operational side, and himself and Brian Tipton, his lead technical guy. And we do quarterly reviews of where they're going. They've made a lot of progress, and I'm very encouraged by that. But we need to move as quickly as we can. We still got a long way to go on ABMS.
Bring closure. So is there anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I think I hit it all.
Okay, now, I think you're doing a press gaggle, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, so he'll be right over there in the corner,
Good.
right? Thank you, sir, for making it in the nick of time.
Yep.
Beautifully done.
Thanks so much. Good for you.
Thank you all for coming.